Chapter 1. The Forgotten Artifact. The skies of Nova City were always a dull gray, a constant reminder of the smog and pollution that clung to the towering buildings, turning the once clear atmosphere into a thick, oppressive fog. The air tasted of rust and oil, a mixture that stuck to your lungs, making every breath feel like a struggle. The city, once a thriving metropolis full of promise and technological wonder, had become a monument to excess. The grand dreams of yesterday were now buried beneath layers of dirt, discarded dreams, and forgotten history. The streets, once filled with the hum of excitement and activity, now crawled with the daily grind of survival, with people moving from one task to the next with the same mechanical motions, never really seeing each other, never really seeing the city for what it had become. It was a place of decay, not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional and spiritual as well. People had grown used to the decay. The forgotten, the broken, and the unwanted had become a part of the landscape, just like the buildings that had once reached for the stars but now sagged under their own weight, abandoned and decaying, slowly being reclaimed by nature and time. Among the crowd that trudged through the streets, one man moved with a purpose but remained unnoticed. His name was Ben Walker, and though he was a man of no particular importance, he had a job to do. A garbage man, a figure so ordinary that even the city's most observant citizens couldn't have picked him out of a lineup. He wore the standard gray uniform, faded and stained with years of grime and filth, and his face, obscured by a dirty cap, was rough and weathered, as though the years of dealing with the refuse of the city had worn down the softness of youth. But if you looked closely enough, you might see the weary glint in his eyes, the one that spoke of a life lived too long under the weight of disappointment and responsibility. Ben was used to being invisible. People passed him by without a second glance, and he had long since learned to accept the fact that no one paid attention to the garbage men of Nova City. They were the ones who cleaned up after the mess, the ones who worked in the background, dealing with the refuse and the forgotten. It was a lonely job, but it was a job, and that's all Ben needed. He didn't ask for much, just a paycheck at the end of the week, in the hope that tomorrow might be a little better than today. His route today was no different from any other. The streets were littered with trash-empty containers, scraps of paper, broken electronics, and discarded food containers. The city seemed to be constantly in a state of disrepair, as though its people had long since given up on anything resembling cleanliness or order. Ben's truck trundled down the narrow alleyways, its brakes screeching as it stopped to pick up the refuse that lined the streets. The smell was foul, a mixture of rotting food, chemicals, and decay, but it was nothing new to Ben. He had long since stopped noticing the smell, just like he had stopped noticing the people who avoided him as he worked. As he tossed the bags of garbage into the back of the truck, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. At the edge of the alley, partially buried beneath a pile of old crates and discarded debris, something caught his attention. It was a glint of metal, rusty and old, but there was something about it that piqued his curiosity. Ben paused for a moment, his hands still gripping the handle of the trash bin, before he decided to investigate. It wasn't unusual for strange objects to be discarded on the streets of Nova City. People threw away all kinds of things, broken appliances, old tech, random parts from who knows where, but this object, this piece of metal, seemed different. Ben moved cautiously toward it, his boots crunching against the littered ground as he crouched down to get a better look. His hands, thick and calloused from years of hard work, brushed aside the debris, revealing what appeared to be an old, rusted transmitter, its surface dented and covered in grime. It looked ancient, as though it had been buried here for decades. There was something about it that seemed out of place in the modern world, a relic from a past that had long been forgotten. Ben studied the transmitter for a moment, his fingers gently brushing over its surface. The metal was cold to the touch, and as he ran his fingers over it, he noticed a series of markings and symbols etched into the side symbols that seemed unfamiliar, foreign even. Ben frowned, squinting at the strange markings, unsure of their meaning. They weren't from any language he knew, not from any of the dead languages he had encountered in his years of living in the city. And yet, there was something familiar about the way the symbols seemed to glow faintly, as if there was some kind of energy still pulsing within the device. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether he should pick it up or leave it behind. It could have been a piece of junk, just another broken device discarded in the streets. But there was something about it, something that felt important, something that tugged at him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Without really thinking, Ben reached down and picked up the transmitter, the cold metal still vibrating faintly in his hands. As soon as he touched it, the world around him seemed to shift, as though the air itself had thickened and the light in the alleyway dimmed slightly. For a brief moment, he felt a strange sensation, a buzzing, a hum in his bones, and then, without warning, the device sprang to life. A sharp, metallic voice crackled through the air, so sudden and unexpected that Ben nearly dropped the transmitter in surprise. The voice was distorted, robotic, but there was a clear sense of desperation in the tone. "Please, I need help. My name is Lyra. I am lost, stranded. Please, help me." Ben froze, his heart pounding in his chest as he listened to the strange message. He glanced around nervously, expecting someone to jump out and laugh at him, expecting the whole situation to turn out to be some kind of joke. But there was no one. No one else was around, and the voice continued, growing clearer with each passing second. "My name is Lyra," the voice repeated, this time with more urgency. "I am an explorer. I was sent to your world, to Nova City, but something went wrong. My ship crashed. I have been stranded here for so long. Please, you have to help me. I don't know how much longer I can survive. You have to find me." Ben's mind raced, his hands shaking as he held the device. He didn't understand. Who was this person? How could she be stranded here on Earth? The voice sounded human, but the mention of a crash, the plea for help, it was all so strange. Was this some kind of joke? A prank? Or was it something more? Lyra's voice crackled again, and Ben's heart skipped a beat. "Please, I don't know how much longer I can hold this transmission. You must hurry. My location is... I don't know how to explain it, but I am not where you think I am. I am in a place between worlds. Find me, please. You are my only hope." Ben felt his breath catch in his throat. He couldn't make sense of it. A transmission from an alien? From someone stranded between worlds? Was this real? And if it was, who was Lyra? Where was she? And why was she calling out to him, of all people? His mind was racing, the weight of the moment sinking in, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't ignore this. Whoever or whatever Lyra was, she was in trouble. And if there was even the slightest chance he could help, he had to try. Ben Walker clutched the rusty transmitter with shaking hands, as if it could slip away from him at any moment. The cool, lifeless metal felt heavier in his grip the more he thought about it, the more he wondered what kind of secrets it might hold. It had felt like an ordinary piece of junk when he first spotted it, something that had been carelessly discarded by someone who saw no value in it. But the second the strange voice had crackled through, everything changed. It was as though the fabric of his reality had been torn wide open, revealing a truth far more extraordinary than he was ready for. The voice of Lyra, an alien girl stranded somewhere in a place that defied the laws of space and time, still echoed in his mind. Each time he thought about it, it felt more surreal, but the urgency in her words was undeniable. Ben had spent the last few years of his life numb, moving through his daily routine without ever truly feeling alive. He woke up, worked, came home, and went to sleep, always in the same monotonous cycle. He had no family left, no close friends, and certainly no meaningful connections. The city, Nova City, was just a place he existed in, not a place he lived in. It was a place where nothing extraordinary happened. Or so he thought. Now, standing on the side of the street with the strange device in his hands, he realized he had been wrong. He had been living in a city that was teeming with mysteries, with secrets far deeper and more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. Lyra's voice, distant yet somehow close, was proof of that. The thought that there might be other worlds, other beings, reaching out to him, was dizzying. He wasn't just a garbage man anymore. He wasn't just an invisible figure walking through a decaying city. He was part of something bigger. Or, at least, he had a chance to be. Ben took a deep breath and steadied himself. The reality of the situation settled over him like a heavy cloak. He had to act. There was no turning back. The voice had begged for his help, and despite the uncertainty gnawing at him, he couldn't ignore it. He had to find out who Lyra was, where she was, and how he could help. There had to be answers hidden somewhere in this world, answers he couldn't even begin to understand. As he made his way back to his apartment, Ben tried to quiet the storm of questions raging in his mind. The device in his hands hummed with energy, still warm from the transmission, and it felt like a lifeline. He couldn't get rid of the feeling that, somehow, it had chosen him. He was the one who had found it. He was the one who was meant to help. The problem was, he had no idea how to start. This was beyond his world. This wasn't just about fixing a broken machine or picking up trash. This was about finding an alien girl stranded between worlds, and there was no instruction manual for that. He reached his apartment, a cramped, dimly lit space on the outskirts of the city. The walls were chipped, the furniture worn down from years of use, and the air was thick with the smell of dust. It was far from a home, more like a place to rest his head when the day's work was done. Ben placed the transmitter down on his small table, his hands trembling as he stared at it. It sat there, innocuous, rusted, and seemingly ordinary, yet it held the key to something unimaginable. He didn't know where to start, but he knew he couldn't just sit here and wait for something to happen. He had to act. The voice had spoken of a place between worlds, a location that Ben couldn't even begin to comprehend. He was no scientist, no expert in alien technology, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't do this alone. He needed help. He needed someone who could understand the device, someone who could help him figure out how to reach Lyra. But who could he turn to? He had no connections in the scientific community. His life had been spent dealing with the waste of the city, not the mysteries of the universe. As the minutes ticked by, Ben's mind raced through possibilities. His thoughts kept returning to one idea. One person he remembered from his past, his old high school friend, Alan. Alan had always been the smart one, the one who was obsessed with science, with theories, with the unknown. Alan had always talked about aliens, about the possibility of life beyond Earth, but Ben had never really taken him seriously. Until now. Alan was the only person Ben knew who might have the expertise to help. With determination, Ben picked up the transmitter and, without wasting another second, dialed Alan's number. The phone rang, and Ben held his breath, hoping against hope that Alan would still be around, still be willing to help. Chapter 2. The Unveiling. The phone rang several times before Alan picked up. His voice came through the speaker, tired but familiar. "Hello, Alan," Ben said, his voice urgent. "It's me, Ben. I need your help." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before Alan spoke again, confusion in his voice. "Ben, what's going on? Why are you calling me after all these years? I don't have time to explain everything, but I found something. Something impossible." Ben's heart raced as he spoke, knowing how outlandish it sounded, but he had no choice but to tell Alan. There was no one else who could help. "I found a rusty old transmitter today, and I swear to you, it's not from this world. It's an alien device, and I think it's trying to contact someone. Someone who's lost." Alan's voice went quiet for a moment, and Ben could hear the skepticism creeping into his tone. "Wait, an alien device? Ben, what are you talking about? Are you serious?" "I'm dead serious, Alan. I've been listening to it. The transmission, it's from an alien girl, and she's stranded somewhere. I don't know where, but I need your help. You've always been the one who could figure this stuff out. You're the only person I know who could understand this." There was a long pause, and for a second, Ben thought Alan might hang up, thinking it was some kind of prank. But then Alan spoke again, his voice a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "All right, Ben, you're not kidding around. I'm in. I'll come by and take a look at this thing. You're really telling me you've got proof of an alien transmission?" "Yes. I know it sounds crazy. But please, Alan, just come. I don't know what I'm dealing with, but I need your help to make sense of it." Okay. I'm on my way," Alan replied. "But if you're messing with me, I'm going to be really pissed." Ben let out a breath of relief. "I'll be waiting." The line went dead, and Ben looked down at the transmitter once more. His fingers traced the strange markings on the device, feeling the faint hum of energy that still pulsed within it. The voice of Lyra still echoed in his mind, desperate and pleading. "Please help me." He felt the weight of her words, the responsibility of her plea, settle on his shoulders like a heavy burden. Minutes passed slowly as Ben waited for Alan to arrive. The uncertainty of it all, the fear of the unknown, the questions that had no answers gnawed at him. What if this was all a mistake? What if he was simply imagining things? But deep down, he knew he couldn't let it go. He had found this device for a reason, and somehow, he was connected to this alien girl. The doorbell rang, snapping him out of his thoughts, and he rushed to answer it. Alan stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of skepticism and excitement. He was thinner than Ben remembered, his face framed by messy brown hair, and his eyes gleamed with curiosity. "You really weren't kidding, huh?" Alan said, stepping inside without waiting for Ben's invitation. Ben nodded and led him to the table where the transmitter sat. "Take a look at this." Alan's eyes widened as he examined the device. This thing, It's definitely not from around here. Are you sure this is real, Ben? I'm positive, Ben replied. I've been hearing her voice through it. Her name's Lyra, and she's asking for help. She's stranded, Alan. She says she's somewhere between worlds. Alan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he picked up the transmitter, turning it over in his hands, his fingers brushing over the strange markings. This is ancient, and it's not Earth technology. I've never seen anything like this before. He paused, staring at the symbols. This could be something huge, Ben. This could change everything. Ben's heart raced. So you think it's real? You think we can find her? Alan set the transmitter down gently and met Ben's gaze. I don't know, but I'm going to help you try. We'll figure this out. Ben nodded, a mixture of relief and uncertainty flooding through him. They were in this together now. Whatever this was, whatever Lyra was, they had a chance to find her and perhaps to uncover something even greater than they had ever imagined. Ben sat on the edge of his bed, hands clenched tightly as Alan meticulously examined the strange transmitter on the table in front of them. The air in the small apartment felt charged, the quiet buzz of anticipation growing stronger with each passing second. Alan, as expected, was fully absorbed in his work. His fingers skimmed over the rusted surface of the device, brushing aside the dirt and grime that had accumulated over years of neglect. His brow furrowed in concentration, his mind clearly working through the puzzle in front of him. Ben's mind, however, was racing, swirling with the implications of everything that had happened in the past few hours. The voice that had called out to him, the desperate plea for help from someone who was far beyond anything he had ever known, had completely shattered the monotony of his life. And now that he had Alan by his side, the question wasn't what was going on, but how they were going to proceed. So this is some kind of alien tech, huh? Alan muttered, more to himself than to Ben. He had been working with the device for nearly an hour, tapping it gently, rotating it, and checking the various components inside. The markings. I've never seen anything like this. It's not anything from the scientific communities I'm familiar with. But this part here, this seems to be some sort of frequency modulator. If I'm right, it's designed to send out signals. But I don't know where the hell the power source is. It's like it's been dormant for centuries, until you turned it on. Ben felt his heart race as Alan spoke. So, is there any way to track this signal? To figure out where it's coming from? She said she was stranded, that she was between worlds. What does that even mean? Alan's eyes flicked up to meet Ben's, his expression serious but tinged with excitement. I don't know. I mean, we're talking about a transmission, so this could be coming from anywhere, literally anywhere in the galaxy, or hell, it could even be some sort of space anomaly. The phrase between worlds, that's got me thinking this could be an advanced form of dimensional travel, or even some sort of wormhole technology. He paused, his hand running through his messy hair in frustration. But that's a huge leap to make. I can't confirm any of this until we test it. Test it? Ben echoed, his voice full of anxiety. How do we test it? Alan, ever the optimist when it came to puzzles, grinned. Well, first we need to connect this to some equipment that can handle the frequency range we're looking for. The signal it's transmitting is faint, but it's definitely active. And who knows? Maybe once we boost the signal enough, we can find a way to reach her. Ben nodded, even though he was still uncertain about everything. How could something so impossible and alien, stranded, and pleading for help be real? He had found this rusty transmitter discarded in an alleyway, a piece of forgotten technology, and now he was involved in something that felt like it came straight out of a science fiction movie. He wasn't ready for any of this, but there was something inside him that refused to let go of the idea that Lyra, this alien girl, was real, and that somehow he had to help her. Alan worked for hours, sifting through his old tools, gathering components from his makeshift lab in the corner of the room. It was a small operation, cobbled together from whatever scraps of tech he could find, but it was enough to allow him to do some of the basic work required to amplify the signal. Ben watched as Alan connected the transmitter to various devices, his fingers moving swiftly and with purpose as he bypassed circuits and reconfigured wires. It was the kind of work that Ben had never seen before, complex, precise, and almost a little too far beyond his comprehension. But it was clear that Alan had done this sort of thing before. He was familiar with the world of science and technology in ways that Ben could never have imagined. As the hours passed, Alan's excitement seemed to grow. The hum of the transmitter grew louder, and the static that had filled the room earlier began to shift, moving towards something more coherent, something with a recognizable pattern. Ben watched in awe as Alan adjusted the equipment one last time. The room seemed to vibrate with a strange energy as the device powered up. "All right, this is it," Alan said, his voice filled with anticipation. He pressed a button, and the faint static that had once been a garbled mess became clearer. Then, the voice came through, crystal clear, like a whisper from somewhere far, far away. "Please, I need help. I am Lyra. I am stranded. Please, help me." Ben's heart nearly stopped as he heard the voice again, this time louder and more distinct than before. There was no mistaking it now. The voice was real. It was Lyra. She was out there, somewhere, calling for help. Ben leaned forward, his eyes wide. We're hearing her. We're hearing her for real. Alan, how are we going to find her?" Alan didn't respond immediately, his face set in a mix of excitement and concern. "We're going to keep boosting the signal," he said, his voice steady now, though it held a sense of urgency. "The more we amplify it, the closer we'll get to pinpointing her location. But it's not going to be easy. We're talking about a form of communication that's outside of normal human understanding. This could be coming from another planet, or even another dimension. We need to tread carefully." Ben nodded, his hands trembling as he clutched the edge of the table. This was real. This wasn't a prank or a mistake. Lyra was out there, somewhere, and somehow, they had to find her. There were still so many questions, so many unknowns, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Ben felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just a garbage man anymore. He was on a mission to help someone who had been lost and alone, stranded in a place beyond anything Ben could comprehend. And there was no going back. Chapter 3, Through the Signal. The days that followed were a blur of activity and excitement. Alan and Ben worked tirelessly, day and night, amplifying the signal, refining the equipment, and trying to decode the transmission in order to pinpoint Lyra's exact location. The city, once a backdrop of endless monotony, had become a distant memory. Ben no longer felt like an invisible figure trudging through the streets. Now he was part of something important. He was on the verge of something monumental. The thought of helping Lyra, of answering her plea, consumed him. It was all that mattered now. Alan, despite his usual calm demeanor, seemed caught up in the energy of the moment. It wasn't often that he got to deal with something truly groundbreaking. This wasn't just an experiment, it was a real, tangible mystery, one that had the potential to change everything. And even though Ben didn't fully understand the scientific complexities of what was happening, he felt the gravity of the situation. There was a life out there, a being who needed help, and they were the only ones who could provide it. Late one evening, after hours of working through the night, the signal began to shift once more. Alan's hands were flying across the console, adjusting the frequency and trying to isolate the exact location. The steady hum of the transmitter had become a low thrum, like the heartbeat of the machine, and Ben could feel the anticipation growing in his chest. They were so close. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the static cleared completely, and Lyra's voice came through, louder and more urgent than ever before. "Please, I am trapped. I cannot hold on much longer. You have to help me. I am not who you think I am. I don't even know who I am anymore." Ben's breath caught in his throat at the desperation in her voice. He looked at Alan, who had stopped working momentarily, his face pale as the weight of the moment settled in. "Do you hear that?" Ben asked, his voice a whisper. "She doesn't know who she is. What does that mean? Why doesn't she know?" Alan looked at the signal, his fingers hovering over the controls. "I don't know. But whatever it is, we need to find her, and we need to find her fast. This is not just a simple rescue mission anymore. There's something deeper at play here, something we don't understand." Ben nodded, his mind racing. Lyra was more than just an alien in need of rescue. There was a mystery surrounding her, one that went far beyond just being stranded. She had lost her sense of identity, her memory, and that only added more urgency to their mission. The more they uncovered, the more questions arose. Who was Lyra? What had happened to her? And how was she connected to the strange signal they had been tracking? Alan's fingers flew over the console again, and the map on the screen blinked with new coordinates. "We've got a location," Alan said, his voice steady now. "We're as close as we've ever been. I think this is it." Ben's heart raced as the coordinates locked into place. It was time. They were about to set off on a journey that would take them far beyond the limits of what they knew. The world they had once known was gone. This was the beginning of something far bigger, something that would change the course of their lives, and perhaps even the course of history. Without another word, Alan began preparing the equipment to track the exact location. Ben watched the screen, his mind focused entirely on the journey ahead. He didn't know what they would find when they arrived, or even what they would encounter along the way. But he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of something much, much larger. The adventure was just beginning. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation, as Ben and Alan worked tirelessly to gather everything they would need for the journey. The signal was becoming stronger, and with each passing hour, Lyra's voice seemed to grow more urgent, more desperate. Ben could hear the faint trembling in her words, the weariness that clung to her every plea. It was like listening to someone struggling to hold on to the very last thread of hope, and Ben couldn't ignore it. They had to move quickly, and they had to be ready for whatever was waiting for them on the other side. Alan had managed to reconfigure the transmitter to connect to a makeshift satellite uplink, which would allow them to follow the signal more precisely. They were now certain that Lyra was somewhere beyond the reach of Earth's conventional boundaries, far away in space, or, as the alien girl had suggested, between dimensions. Ben had no idea how that was even possible, but he was certain of one thing: he was about to embark on an adventure that defied every rule he had ever known. The two of them loaded up a modified, small spacecraft that Alan had cobbled together from the remnants of old tech and scrap parts. It wasn't the sleek, polished ships that people used for interstellar travel, but it would get them where they needed to go. The cramped cockpit, cobbled together with mismatched materials, seemed to hum with an energy all its own as Alan inputted the coordinates. Ben sat quietly in the co-pilot seat, his eyes glued to the screens that flickered with symbols and data that made no sense to him. But Alan seemed completely at ease, his fingers flying over the controls with ease, as though he had been preparing for this moment his entire life. "Are you ready?" Alan asked, his voice full of excitement. Ben swallowed hard, glancing out the small viewport at the city that had been his home for so long. Nova City looked like an ant hill from this height, its towering structures now dwarfed by the vastness of the sky stretching out before them. The city, the life he had lived for so long, seemed so far away now. The weight of it all was almost too much to bear. "I think so," Ben replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I still don't understand. What are we about to find? What happened to her?" Alan paused for a moment, his hands still on the controls as he prepared the ship for takeoff. "I don't know, Ben. But whatever it is, it's bigger than us. We've opened a door that we can't close. We're about to step into something unknown." Ben nodded, his pulse quickening. He wasn't just leaving behind Nova City. He was leaving behind his entire life, everything he had ever known, in search of a stranger, an alien girl who had reached out to him. The gravity of it was immense, but in a way, it was freeing. For the first time in years, Ben didn't feel like he was just existing. He felt like he was part of something bigger, something that had the power to change everything. The spacecraft's engines hummed to life, and with a roar, they blasted off into the void. The ground beneath them shook, the city below rapidly shrinking as they ascended higher into the sky. The stars outside the viewport became a blur as they broke through Earth's atmosphere, their journey into the unknown beginning in earnest. Chapter 4. The Revelation. Hours passed as they traveled deeper into the vast expanse of space. The stars outside flickered like distant pinpricks of light, and the ship's instruments were filled with a steady stream of data that only Alan could fully understand. Ben sat in silence, lost in his own thoughts as the hum of the ship provided a steady rhythm that seemed to echo through his chest. Each passing minute brought them closer to the unknown, closer to finding Lyra, and closer to unraveling the mystery of who she was, where she was, and why she had reached out to him. Ben's mind constantly returned to her last words, the cryptic message she had left behind. "I am not who you think I am. I don't even know who I am anymore." What did that mean? How could someone be so lost that they didn't even know who they were? Was this just some desperate plea for help? Or was there something deeper, something hidden beneath her words that they had yet to uncover? Alan's voice broke the silence, drawing Ben from his thoughts. "We're getting close, Ben. The signal is intensifying. It's coming from right here." Ben glanced at the instruments in front of him, noticing the change in the readings. The static on the signal had turned into a steady hum, and now, the frequency was clearer than ever. They were on the verge of something huge, something that could change the course of their lives. Alan's hands moved quickly over the controls, and suddenly, the display flickered. The ship's lights dimmed for a brief moment, and then a map appeared on the screen. It was unlike anything Ben had ever seen. There were no recognizable star systems, no constellations. It was a map of unknown space, an uncharted region that stretched far beyond the known boundaries of Earth and its neighboring planets. Ben's heart skipped a beat. Is that where she is? Alan nodded, his eyes wide with awe. I think so. We found her, Ben. This map, it's pointing to a place where no human has ever been. It's something beyond the limits of space. This is the location of the source of the signal. It's where Lyra is. Before Ben could respond, the ship began to shake, and a bright light appeared in the distance, a swirling vortex of energy that seemed to pull them in. Alan's hands flew over the controls, but it was too late. The ship was caught in the gravitational pull of the anomaly, and before either of them could fully comprehend what was happening, they were being drawn toward it, hurtling through space at an incredible speed. Hang on, Alan shouted, his voice tight with panic. The ship was pulled forward, spiraling into the vortex, the light growing brighter and brighter until it consumed everything around them. Ben could hear the alarms blaring, the ship's systems struggling to keep up with the sudden turbulence. His stomach churned as they were pulled into the heart of the anomaly, and then, with a sudden jolt, everything went dark. When Ben opened his eyes again, he found himself lying on the floor of the ship, disoriented. The hum of the engines had ceased, and there was a strange stillness in the air. He pushed himself up, his body aching, and looked around. Alan was already on his feet, his face pale but determined. What happened? Ben asked, his voice trembling. I don't know, Alan replied, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. The ship had landed, though it didn't look like any place Ben had ever seen. Outside the viewport, the stars were gone, replaced by an endless void, a swirling mass of color and light that seemed to bend the very fabric of space. The air outside the ship was thick with an energy that felt unnatural, like the very atmosphere was alive with something ancient and powerful. I think we've crossed over, Alan said, his voice filled with awe and fear. This isn't just space. This is something else entirely. We're in the place between worlds, Ben. Ben stood up slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. They had made it. They had actually crossed over into the unknown. And somewhere out there, in this strange, uncharted realm, Lyra was waiting. A soft voice crackled through the ship's communication system, cutting through the silence. It was faint, but Ben recognized it instantly. Please. I'm here. Please. Come. Find me. It was Lyra's voice, and it was clearer than ever before. She was close. She was waiting for them. Ben took a deep breath, looking out into the swirling unknown. The journey had just begun, and though the uncertainty was terrifying, he knew one thing for certain. He was going to find her. Whatever it took, whatever they had to face, he wasn't going to leave her stranded in this place. Not now. Let's go, Ben said, his voice steady. Let's find her. And with that, they stepped into the unknown, determined to uncover the truth about Lyra, about the place between worlds, and about the destiny that was waiting for them both.